Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. We are going to give people a few more minutes to join on the line, and then we'll get started probably about 3:02. Thank you. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Macy from NARC. Thank you so much for joining us. I think we're going to give people just one more minute to log on, and then we'll get started. Thanks. All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Macy Morin. I'm a program coordinator at the National Association of Regional Councils. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm happy to see a few familiar names as well as new ones, and I'm glad you're all here. I'm excited to be joined by some great speakers today to talk all about value chain coordination and the role of regional councils. We have Dr. James Barham, who is a senior advisor at the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Rural Development Innovation Center. We have Katrina Van Dis, who is the executive director of the High Desert Food and Farm Alliance, and she's also a former program administrator at the Central Oregon Intergovernmental Council. And also Lindsay Smith, the Regional Food Systems Value Chain Coordinator at the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments here in D.C. I just want to do a quick note first. There will be time at the end for any questions or comments from the audience. Since there are so many of you today, I think the best way to do it would be the raise your hand function. So if you press it on the right-hand side of the screen, that'll notify me that you would like to make a question or a comment directly to our speakers today. So be sure to press that. And if you prefer to just type in a question, that way I can read it to our speakers, you can also do that. That's located on the questions box, also at the right end of your question bar. All the questions will be held towards the end when we have a special time carved out for that. And with that, let's get started. First up, we have Jim Barham. He is an agricultural economist for USDA's Rural Development Agency. Jim joined USDA in 2007, where he has worked to improve marketing opportunities for small and mid-sized producers through a combination of research, technical assistance, and financial support. Jim has presented research and published several articles on regional food hubs, food value chains, local food distribution, and food service procurement. He is also the USDA lead for FoodLink, a public-private partnership to support value chain coordination efforts, and serves as a senior advisor to Rural Development Innovation Center, a recently established office developing innovative products, policies, and practices to empower rural community transformation. And with that, I'm going to give Jim the mouse.
All right, well, welcome. Thank you, everyone, as we get that transferred over. Let's see if it works.
Yes, I see it.
It does. All right, we're good. Welcome. As Macy said, I'm Jim Barham at the USDA Rural Development Innovation Center. I'm really happy and honored to be able to give you a kind of a short introduction into value chain coordination. My presentation will first talk briefly about FoodLink that Macy mentioned in my introduction, or my bio, which is I co-lead an initiative with the Wallace Center That's why you'll see some co-branding on this presentation, because a lot of it is based on the work that we did together and are doing together under FoodLink. Then I'll go into a little bit just defining food value chains, how we've been measuring impact of value chain coordination work, and provide some resources to support value chain development. And I'm going to try to whip through all this in 10 minutes, so bear with me. First, FoodLink, which stands, because we love our acronyms at USDA, of course, federal government loves acronyms. So LINK stands for Leveraging Investment for Network Coordination. And it was originally and intentionally designed to be a public-private partnership between federal agencies, USDA, as well as other agencies like Appalachian Regional Commission and Delta Regional Authority, and ourselves to partner with philanthropy and other private funders to support value chain coordinators across the country. We've done this in 13 locations. One of our presenters today, Lindsay Smith, is one of the groups at the Metro Washington COG that has received some USDA funding as well as philanthropic support to help finance her work doing value chain coordination, really food systems development for the greater DC area. The expected impacts of this particular program was first and foremost to increase revenue to local producers. So as value chain coordinator, someone who's helping link that supply to that market demand, we wanted to see really clear benefits accrue to producers. And of course, at the same time, hopefully see additional jobs created along the value chain, as well as increase in healthy food access. So defining food value chains. What is a food value chain? I mean, it is definitely different from just a supply chain. A lot of people use those terms interchangeably, and that really isn't what we're talking about. In fact, the genesis or a lot of the conceptual origin of when we talk about food value chains actually comes from the work that two gentlemen, Rich Pirog and Steve Stevenson, one from University of Michigan, one from the University of Wisconsin, then they were talking about values-based food supply chain, okay? Values-based food supply chain. So that's kind of a mouthful. So we did shorten it to food value chains, but that is what we're talking about. And they are, in some ways, very similar to a supply chain, right? In the fact that there's production happening, there's distribution, there's aggregation, there's processing, people are eating the food, there's the waste stream, there's the inputs, and so forth and so on, right? So whether you're in a local food system, an international food system, if you're in a supply chain or value chain, those activities occur, right? The difference is that in value chains, you're not just looking at those supply chain activities, but those businesses and what they're trying to accomplish, right? And with value chains, we're talking about both creating financial success, as it says here, and social benefits, right? Often called creating shared value. And in shared value, we're talking about two types of shared values that these businesses within a value chain are trying to create. One are kind of mission values, like what does this supply chain mean to us? Why are we calling it a value chain? Because we are really concerned about, say, farm viability or farmland preservation or healthy food access or sustainable production practices. You know, a lot of what we see with fair trade practices, farm worker rights, the entire value chain figures out together what is meaningful to them. And of course, that is also something that's marketable as well. And that's where you could have some financial success by being able to differentiate your product with a value-added good, where you're telling a particular story about a certain benefits that accrue to certain communities, and yet at the same time you're having these social benefits. So both the financial success and social benefits, and along with the shared mission values are operational values that you're going to be accountable to the entire value chain, that there's a long-term commitment, there's transparency, open ongoing communication, these types of shared values, mission and operational values. Sorry, these operational values are also happening at the same time. We've published some reports on this. There's a lot more. If you look at things like what Michael Porter and Kramer have done at Harvard, as well as others at USDA, we put out a report a few years ago on food value chains, looking specifically at value chains within agriculture in order to really understand how they work, how they tick, how do you create these things, how do you maintain, how do you sustain these things. And one of the things that really emerged from that body of work was that while you need the hard infrastructure, whether we're talking food systems or in other types of sectors, one of the best investments is actually in human capital. And within food value chains, it are these things called value chain coordinators, that they are the kind of the glue, in our case, in the local regional food system space, that really connect the dots, make things, manage all the different actors within the space so things are more effective and efficient. And we identified both through that report and some of the work we've done to date of 6 roles that we look at in terms of value chain coordinators. I would say, in my personal opinion, the first 2 are kind of the first tier roles. Like, these are the essential roles of value chain coordinator. And the next 4 roles become pieces that build upon their work, that are essential ultimately for them to being effective in these 2 roles. That being like a market matchmaker, really helping to connect the dots, matchmaking those producers to those particular buyers. And that can be sometimes a one-off type relationship, a quick introduction of Farmer Jane to Chef Joe, or it could be to a farmer to a food service director, helping to build those relationships. Sometimes it can be very quick and just a simple phone call. Other times it might take years to actually develop that value chain, where you have the producers working with the distributors, and you have the distributors working with the processors, and so on and so forth, getting to the ultimate buyer, where you're taking, sometimes years to build up that set of shared values. Once you have built or starting to build these relationships, clearly there's going to be certain bottlenecks or challenges that exist. So you might, as a value chain coordinator, be doing a lot of technical assistance. It might be, I'd say, on food safety. You're trying to get more local food into a institution like a hospital, and there's a lot of regulations requirements, including food safety, and maybe you're working with producers so that they'll be able to meet those requirements. Similarly, you might, while you're working through these value chains, find that there are significant policy barriers for these value chains to be able to operate effectively. And so you're going to be working to help them address those particular policies. Similarly, on resource prospector, or even as the catalyst innovator, you're finding ways by which one of the bottlenecks might simply be that there is a need for a food hub in the middle of this value chain, that the existing distributors aren't working, and that there's a new business that needs to be developed in order to ultimately bring from product from farm to table. We've also, through our work, realized that there are almost 2 categories of value chain coordinators, or subsets of value chain coordinators. On one hand, and the names here are all the groups that we worked with under the Food Link program, the 13 value chain coordinators, and they kind of broke into 2 groups kind of naturally. We didn't select them this way, but some are employed or directly involved with some kind of social enterprise, like a food hub or a kitchen incubator. So the value chain coordinator is working within that business operation, but also trying to provide more support to the overall food shed, or to the producers and others within that food shed, to support the overall food system. So it's not just tailored just for that particular business, but that is where they reside. And then on the other hand, which would happen obviously with the Metro Council of Governments, Metro Washington Council of Governments, and also with Katrina, with her work in Oregon, where you're more of a relational VCC. There isn't a specific social enterprise that you are attached to. And there are pros and cons to each of being in those types of worlds that we don't have time to get into, but we can certainly, if we want to dive into more detail, we can in the Q&A. I wanted to share with you just a little bit on measuring impact. 2 of the ways we've been doing it. The first way, well, there are many ways of doing it, but 2 that I want to highlight. One is on kind of looking at return on investment. And one of the things for us, in order to really make a strong case for why USDA and our partners should be supporting value chain coordinators, is that there is a very clear return on investment. And you can see here some of the ways that we have been measuring that. Obviously, the most direct is that you see increased market sales producers, but we also want to give credit where credit's due to value chain coordinators, and that their ability to help producers and others in the value chain secure other resources, right? That's part of that return. And then even monetize the technical assistance, right? So you might be giving 50 hours of technical assistance on group gap training or food safety training, and you want to be able to show that that is part of the return on investment. You're providing these types of increased capacity to producers. So that was one way, and we've kind of quantified that we feel like, and it is bearing fruit, that in many cases value chain coordinators can get a 5x return on investment. And this is just kind of a way to benchmark that. I don't want to dive too deep, but this was just one of the actuals of one of our cases in La Montanita of how they went about doing that. The second way, which I think is really cool as well, is just looking at social network analysis. A lot of value chain coordination isn't just about the money that's coming in and money's going out and that type of thing. It's really about how you develop new social relationships. And social network analysis allows us to do this. So for this particular example, with the group in Kentucky, they were working with a number of organic producers and helping them try to find new markets for their products, as well as even to build up the production capacity of these producers. So they did a convening, kind of a matchmaking business exchange, and the pre-convening, the yellow dots are all the resource providers, tend to be a lot of nonprofits and extension agents and so forth. The blue are the buyers, and there's just a few of them scattered about, and then you have the producers. The really fascinating thing is you can see the clumping of all the resource providers, right? All of the nonprofits and extension folks know each other, but not so many know the buyers or really know where the producers. And after, kind of quantifying or be able to demonstrate that, what it was like before, then they do kind of a post-survey analysis and see now just through having one of these exchanges and doing it in a really nice facilitative way, they're able to create more of these connections. And then now from here, you can begin to see, okay, what's going to happen after this? Now that they know a little more about each other, will this actually lead to maybe some new market opportunities, to new resources flows between the different groups? Anyway, just a really cool thing to show in terms of the possibilities of social network analysis that I thought you might be interested in. I know my time is limited, and I knew there was no way I was going to be able to get through everything. This right here, I know it's a little overwhelming, but part of it is just to demonstrate there is close to 40 USDA programs that can support local food systems work. Within the realm of value chain coordination, I've highlighted, or I will highlight, a dozen programs. The first, funds to support VCCs. We have things like Local Food Promotion Program. We have the Partner Program, Farmers Market Promotion Program, the Rural Business Development Grant. I sit over in Rural Development. This is used to assist businesses. A lot of value chain coordinators or value chain coordinators could access these to assist businesses along the value chain. Similarly, our farm to school grants. You need a value chain coordinator to make a lot of these farm to school transactions occur, right? It gets complicated working with schools, but having someone in between to help really link farmers to these market opportunities institutions is huge. And we have grant support for that specifically. Our specialty crop block grants, as long as you're doing fruit and veg and trying to connect fruit and veg producers to markets, that could be a great program. Community food projects is another one over at our sister program, NIFA. Again, just highlighting a lot here. We can always in the Q&A have more discussion about any of these particular grant programs, and I will give you my contact information in a second and would be happy to share more information about any of these programs. We have our 2501, which is for socially disadvantaged farmers, which could be helpful in this. Risk Management Education Program has done a lot of work helping producers with things like food safety, and the value chain coordinator could tap into that to provide that type of training. Rural Cooperative Development grants that support cooperative development, so on and so forth. So that was just a dozen programs I wanted to highlight to you all. And then finally, look, the Rural Regional Councils, that's what we're going to get into. That's why you're actually here, not to hear talking head from USDA. Oregon, you're going to hear from Katrina. I just happened to be in Atlanta a couple months ago. Their COG there is doing amazing work. And I was also with the Central Midlands. One of the takeaways from both of these groups at the end of the day was like, hey, like there are fundamental roles for the COGS to play in food systems development. And one possible solution is to bring in-house a value chain coordinator for that specific work. And we know with the work that NARC has done, thank you very much, that there's at least another 37 regional councils out there doing this food systems work. So again, I want to thank Macy for having me on today to be able to give you a quick spiel on value chain coordination, and I'll turn it back over to her. Thanks.
Thank you, Jim. All right, so we're going to get it switched over to Katrina. Katrina is, as I said earlier, the executive director at the High Desert Food and Farm Alliance. Prior to taking on this new role in May 2018, she was the program administrator at Central Oregon Intergovernmental Council. She has an MS in Community Development and Applied Economics from the University of Vermont. She has been involved in local and regional food systems work for over 10 years and is a founding member of the Oregon Community Food System Network. Her work has been focused on developing the supply and value chain for local food from post-harvest to the end user. This included technical support for farmers, hosting chef-farmer mixer events, working with school districts to improve the purchasing of locally grown products, and researching and developing a rural food hub model. She recently co-published a study, Economic Impact of Local Food Producers in Central Oregon, which highlights the impact small to mid-sized farmers have on the economy. With that, I'll turn it over to Katrina.
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks. Just want to make sure. And then I don't have access to the slides. Oh, okay, there I do. Thank you. Hello, everybody. I am Katrina, and that is a picture of my garden. And things that I want to talk about, I tried to put together this slide taking into consideration how I got to where I was or am after working in this for 10 years and not knowing that what I was doing and not realizing that I was doing value chain coordination along the way. So I'll tell you my current and past role, and then the role of Central Oregon Intergovernmental Council in this, the history of that, some strategies for other COGS, and then funding opportunities. There's just a delay, sorry. So my current role is executive director of a nonprofit whose mission is to support a healthy and thriving food and farm network in Central Oregon. And then I used to be the program administrator for COIC. And I think it's important to note that Central Oregon is in the middle of the state. We're geographically isolated by mountains and have a short growing season of May to October. And we serve a tri-county region, which is about the size of New Hampshire. So it's really large. We're looking at different climates, microclimates, and limited supply. So I just want to emphasize that it's a rural community, so which is a little bit different than what Lindsay will talk about with DC area. So a lot of what we focused on is the value chain coordination that James mentioned. So I'm gonna reiterate a lot of what he said, which was that our focus was really relational. We're looking at some capacity support, which is filling in for staffing where places couldn't figure out how to pay for staff. We provide technical support. Maybe that's bringing together food safety people from Oregon Department of Agriculture with farmers who don't know how to link, being a convener, doing research and development, identifying barriers, and I'll talk about more of those as I go through the history. So just to give you a sense of where we started, I started at COIC. I finished a grant from USDA Farmers Market Promotion Program, and that was in 2008. And really, the goal was to improve food access at 5 regional and very rural farmers markets. So that includes the bulleted points that you're looking at as far as the intent of it. Then I lost access. Okay, sorry. There. Collaboration. So I can't reiterate this enough, that the work that we have done is really based on relationships. It took me probably 5 years to gain trust from our partners. And I started that because of the Farmers Market Promotion Program grant that we got. So these were the 2 key people that I worked with. And I met with these people because of the outcome of that grant. And we started to define where we fit in that system. So OSU was technical on-farm support. Our COG looked at post-harvest to markets, and then Neighbor Impact was really looking at food access for low income. We decided that we didn't really know what we were doing, and we wanted to figure out more about how we could help the system. So we together got an AmeriCorps to conduct a food assessment. The food bank hosted it, and then I myself at COIC and our partner at Extension were technical advisors. And from that, the outcome was a food summit where we brought together leaders from the region, policymakers, stakeholders, the public, basically educating people about what we found out. And 2 of those main outcomes were, one was the policy council that was formed because there was no nonprofit looking at the really broad food system piece. And then COIC started to look at what is the role in the whole chain, the food system chain. And so what we came up with was looking at facilities, what facilities are missing, what is consumer demand, how can we help that, a little bit with production planning. There's a little bit in research and development, but definitely not production or food safety. Our partners were able to do that, but we could provide support to them to continue their work. In 2010, I started doing some project work. The first 2 bullets, OSU Extension came to COIC and asked us to host. They wrote a grant and wanted us to partner as technical advisor. So we conducted a meet CSA study with them and a farmer, and basically provided the support to do the research and write a report, and then provide it to both the farmer but also the public to really understand how other ranchers could replicate this. We developed a food network with a farmer who said, I want to be able to work with other people better, but I don't know how. And so we were that relation, that glue that held it together. And then we started looking at food hubs. So again, our role was this capacity support where people felt like they didn't know what to do, but we could find out a way to do it, the technical collaboration, research and development. And as time went by, our work started to expand. We got a large private foundation grant. We started doing a little bit more with food access. The bullets in green are the things that we started doing that were a little bit more focused on the value chain itself. So looking at distribution and transportation in a very big and rural region. And that included passing through funds to help someone drive to different parts of the region and pick up food and deliver it, and seeing over a 2-year period, does that make sense? How can we support that? At the time, it didn't make sense. It didn't pencil out, but it was a good pilot project to figure out that that's really missing, and we need to figure out how we could do that better. But we continued our food hub feasibility study work, really looking at supply and demand, what was missing. And so as time goes by, what we start to do is changes a little bit. So we apply for grants and we pass through funds to support farmers. So that looked like infrastructure, greenhouse grants that could really help them grow more. And then also we were at a place where we could strategically start to look at funding that would help all of our partners together, because at this point we have a lot of different partners and not all of them can apply for specific grants, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a sec. But so now we are really getting into the more value chain specific food hub study. We're looking at the supply and demand. We did a local food impact study that looked at small to mid-sized farmers and really what impact did they have in our region. And it was a rural study. It was 38 farmers and ranchers. It was small. It was using the USDA's toolkit to do this study. We partnered with OSU, the state university, and we're funded through USDA partially to do this. And right now, I'm not at COIC anymore, but they're working on developing the food hub business plan, and looking at a private-public partnership model with that. So the last piece that we kind of added on to what we were doing was really identifying more barriers and opportunities specifically related to the food hub. We're engaging at the regional and state level with policymakers that can then start to push on legislature to start to think about how can we fund more of these projects, what is important for our region, really bringing it up a little bit at high level. I went around to every county and presented our economic impact study and really tried to make the argument for why we need to support farmers in our region. And I think that that's a role that a COGS could play that other people can't. We were able to really go to our commissioners and have a conversation about that. And I think that that was really important. So here are some strategies I thought of that if you're looking to get into this and you don't know how, the first is to find out what is out there. Who are the people that are maybe working in the food system? What are their roles? What projects are they doing? What are they doing? So start collaborating. Where can you provide support that might be missing? And maybe that's just having a conversation with Food Bank and their extension agent. What are you not able to do that maybe we could do? A food assessment is a great way to start. You start looking at what's really going on in your system. And then again, getting more down to the nitty gritty, what projects can you specifically work on and those partners, and then start to look at funding that fits that. And here's the funding that we wrote over the 10 years that I was there. James touched on most of these. And what I want to highlight is the joint funding with the nonprofits that now I am the executive director for, and there's a reason why there's an importance. So joint funding is really advantageous for COGS. The focus areas can be different. So for example, in our region, the nonprofit focuses on food access, farm support, and regional marketing. And then the COG can more focus on the markets, the specific food hub, what infrastructure is existing, and where can we be a connector between. We can really look at the regional and state support services. Maybe that's, I think it looks different in every state, but tying into what's existing. So for us, that's maybe Business Oregon or regional solutions in our state. And then you can also really start to look at the economic impact. So here's an example of why joint funding is really important. For the Rural Business Development Grant, the COG has to be the applicant, and it supports a private business. So right now, COIC is in the process of finishing out a grant where we were working with a small private business who was going to co-locate to help develop a food hub. And so we have been working with them for the last 2 years. For especially crop block grants, it doesn't cover indirect expenses for COGS, and that can be a large barrier. So it will cover consulting costs. So a nonprofit could apply for it, and you could be a consultant on that. And that's a great way to partner. Another one is that private foundations may not understand the role that a COG plays in the region, but they have lots of money that may support projects, maybe food access or other things. So that's another place that you could look for joint funding that would be really helpful. And even though I work for HDFFA, which is really an outcome of the work that the COG did for the 10 years, I just recently became the executive director in May and worked for COIC up to then, but this organization wouldn't exist had I not started working on the value chain coordination back 10 years ago. So there are some major outcomes that can come from being a coordinator. That's it for mine, Macy.
All right, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Okay, so just before I jump on to the last speaker, I did get a couple of questions about the PowerPoint. It is available to download now. In the handout section, you'll see that there's one file there, and it'll provide all the slides that you see here today. Also, it'll be available through just a PowerPoint file, but if you want a PDF, I'm happy to provide it. Just email me and let me know. My email will be at the end, but it's maci, maci.morin, MORIN, @marc.org. All right, so I am going to now introduce our last but not least final speaker. She is Lindsay Smith. She's been working with the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments to develop a regional food systems value chain coordination program, as Jim alluded to earlier, an effort launched in 2016 with the support of philanthropy and the USDA. The goals of the program are to grow market connections and profitability for regional farmers committed to sustainable practices and to increase consumer access to healthy local food. Previously, Lindsay consulted with philanthropy on strengthening local and regional food systems and improving food security in the metropolitan Washington region. She has also served as the Food Policy Council Coordinator, consulted on land conservation, and worked as a practicing urban planner in suburban Maryland. In July, Lindsay graduated from Valor, the Virginia Agriculture Leaders Obtaining Results Program, a 2-year agricultural leadership development program. She holds a master's in urban planning and a master's in environmental policy from the University of Michigan. With that, I'll pass it over to Lindsay.
Thanks so much, Macy, and hi, everybody. I'm excited to see how many of you were able to join us today. I just had a chance to get to know Katrina's work pretty recently, and I am excited to say I actually learned a lot and have some ideas for our program as a result of that. As Jim mentioned, we are part of the Food Link program at that USDA started with the support of Wallace Center. And just to give you a little bit of regional context and background about the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, which locally we call COG, we are a membership organization of 24 local governments that covers 2 states and the District of Columbia. We have several very large county government members, as well as smaller municipalities, and we're currently home to over 5 million people. so quite different than where Katrina works, and we are largely, but not exclusively, eaters. We do have a lot of farms and farmers in our region, an increasing urban agriculture scene, a lot of markets, growing craft beverage scene, and it's an interesting time to be doing this work. I think, as I was reflecting on Katrina's presentation, one of the things I noted is that a lot of the foundational work that she did through the Council of Governments that she was with in Oregon, that work had already been done when we started this program a little over 2 years ago. Yeah, and I could go into details, but I think just in the interest of time. So I just wanted to show you quickly an economic impact slide, actually, that we shared with our Council of Governments board in June. There's a forthcoming food economy study on the District of Columbia. This is preliminary information, but this was information shared with one of our committees this spring, just about the total value-added economic impact of food. They did actually measure urban ag, but much of it is restaurant, hospitality, grocery, and then also while these are not apples to apples comparisons, this is some of the most current data that we have from the state of Maryland and also from the state of Virginia. These are all 2015 figures, and on the Maryland and Virginia side cover our 8 county governments, where we do actually have quite a bit of agriculture in some of those jurisdictions. So as I mentioned, a lot of food systems development was underway when we started FoodLink. In addition to kind of vibrant agricultural economy, growing number of farmers markets, other direct-to-consumer opportunities, food hubs. We have several food hubs in our region. We also have a growing number of food policy councils. And so looking across the landscape and doing an assessment, we didn't do the full-blown community food assessment that Katrina mentioned, just given some of our program requirements and time, but we did do an assessment. We looked at our core competencies, and these were the major priorities that we identified where we thought we could bring unique expertise in a way that would be additive to the great work that's happening in our region. So just quickly, and I'll share a couple examples in the next slides, the areas where we are working and where I think a lot of our work in this next year will be focused around, for instance, fostering local food and agriculture business connections. We have started a local food distribution work group to look at transportation, infrastructure, and other barriers to growing the local food economy, to making those rural and urban connections that Jim mentioned in his presentation. This is both a learning forum and a networking forum where we bring in speakers or feature speakers from the region to talk about a particular topic, but also leave plenty of time for the experts just to connect with one another, meet each other, form partnerships. And then the other one is around expanding market opportunities. This gets a little bit more to some of the direct goals that FoodLink set out for ROI, increasing access to local food. We are looking at whether or not our cooperative purchasing program can be leveraged for a local food buy. I'd say that's probably the one where we still have the most work to do. And then more generally, supporting food and agriculture policy and infrastructure, being a convener, bringing data, expertise to different issues within the food system. Okay, so just a quick example on expanding market opportunities. I saw that Katrina mentioned a subsidized CSA, and we are also piloting something along those lines, although, and I'm not sure, my guess is that maybe Katrina can tell us during the Q&A, but my guess is that is maybe that their program may be more related to food access for low-income community members. Ours is an employee benefit program that we're piloting, very much inspired by some of the work in Madison, Wisconsin. The city of Baltimore has a program like this, and actually we're finding more and more across the country. But just a brief picture image on the right here is our Metro Smart Trip card. A number of employers in our region partially subsidize the cost of transit ridership in our region. And, you know, the dream would be to one day be able to do that for small local farms as well as an employee benefit program. So we're in the beginning stages of that. On support to food and ag policy infrastructure, one of the things that we're working quite a bit on right now is updating and a report that we authored a number of years ago called What Our Region Grows. And it looks at agricultural production in and around our metropolitan Washington Council of Governments region. Really looking at production issues, land access, land conservation, regulatory issues. And we will be re-releasing this fall with updated information, both from the U.S. Census of Agriculture, but also with locally collected information that we can't get from the Census of Agriculture around things like urban farms, for instance. This is something I wish that we could have done actually at the beginning of our FoodLink pilot program that we've started here at the Council of Governments, but suffice to say it's going to be a really critical conversation piece for us to engage with a variety of our local government members, again, on what's happening from a production standpoint in our region. And then we do expect to update it again in the spring once we have the 2017 Census of Ag data. We have started a number of working in ad hoc groups. This picture is the second meeting of food policy councils in our region. We may or may not be doing a third one this fall, but at the moment, let me see, we have food policy councils in 2 of our Maryland member jurisdictions. The District of Columbia has one, Fairfax County, Virginia has one, Frederick County, Maryland is starting one. So is that 5? Sorry. Another example of this is we convened some of our farmers markets associations and state governments last year for a meeting to just compare what's happening in markets throughout the Council of Governments region, and we will work with them to do that again this year. These are just some highlights from what we're finding. Obviously not very good at this. In our What Our Region Grows update, but as time is running out, let me just flip to the last slide here. With the release of this report, we expect to do some more strategic direction setting with our Council of Government members. We are planning to continue implementing the different goals and priorities that we've identified and some of the initiatives that I mentioned, most of the initiatives I mentioned. And then a task that we continue to work on is partnership and program support exploration. And I think that this is a theme that I've heard when talking with some other councils of government that have programs or are seeking to start programs. A contrast to Katrina's experience is that beyond our partnership with USDA to work on FoodLink, we are not currently funded by any federal monies. We write a lot of letters of support for the grants that Jim mentioned for farmers, for other organizations that assist farmers or that work with communities on food access. But we are by and large funded by philanthropy, and also there's a lot of contribution from some of the other COG staff that work on this program with me. So this is an area that we continue to work on. It's we're entering into year 3 of the program, and would like to keep looking for ways to institutionalize the program. So I think with that, we promised 15 minutes for Q&A, and here is my contact information.
Right,
Thanks so much.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you so much to all of our speakers today, actually. You all did a really great job. And now we are going to move to Q&A. So with that, as I said in the beginning, if you want to be one of the ones that talks to or asks a question of or wants to comment to our speakers directly, feel free to raise your hand, and I will unmute. One at a time, I'll unmute your phone. But if you're more comfortable with asking a question via the question box that is signed to, I'm happy to read those out loud. And with that, let me see if I saw anybody's hand raised. There's a lot of you, so it may take a while to scroll through. But we definitely have questions in the question queue, so I can start there. Let's see, it says, Lindsay, could you talk about ways to collect data on local agriculture, locally grown food economic impact, beyond the economic impact of all food? Our challenge in Central Texas is how to compute the money spent on locally grown.
Macy, could you just say the last part, our challenge in Texas is to what? Could you just repeat that?
I think it was to compute the money spent on, I would think, locally grown food economics is what I would guess is what she was trying to say.
Yeah, I am going to ask Jim and Katrina to also help answer this question. A lot of our local data that we are collecting here right now, quite frankly, is just counting. Working with local government staff, working with our food policy councils, we work a lot with our local agricultural marketing development specialists that are doing business development with farmers and farm-based businesses. The economic impact data that I showed, those were studies commissioned by the DC Office of Planning, the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. They have what looks like a long-standing partnership with the University of Virginia to do their economic impact study. And then Marbidco in Maryland, which works on rural business development. They worked with one of our universities on the Eastern Shore. We're not at a point where we've done kind of a regional economic impact study, but I think that maybe Katrina and Jim might have additional perspective for you.
Yeah, this is Jim. I was actually, I'd love to hear more from Katrina on not to pass the buck, but no, but you were able to utilize the USDA Local Food Economics Toolkit. That was a nice partnership with USDA. I'd love to know kind of how the process how far you went along the process with the toolkit, because obviously it goes from not just assessment to ultimately, in some cases, using in-plan and developing multipliers. So let's go a little deeper in that for us.
Yeah, sure. So we got funding through the local food promotion program, and OSU, their economist there not volunteered, but she didn't request any funds. So that's a lot of match. She used in-plan. So we used the whole toolkit from the beginning to the end, and it actually provided feedback to them about it, because it's very difficult to use if you're not familiar. And as a COG, we didn't want to even get into in-plan because it's just crazy. But so what we did was go and have one-on-one conversations with farmers and ranchers and asked for their tax returns to get the information that we wanted about expenses and revenue. And that in and of itself might be difficult for some people. The reason we could do that is we've had built trust with farmers for about 5 to 7 years. So they knew that what we were doing with the information. You could also do a different survey that doesn't use tax information, but we really spent, I'd say, probably 10 hours with each farmer. Like I mentioned, there are 38. Not all the data was clean, so we didn't use it all, but that's how we got our information, because in our rural region, the census data is not at all reflective of what's actually going on. It says that we have 2,500 small to mid-sized farmers that are direct marketing products, and that's just not true. I think that's a nice tax write-off, or some of them are just they have horses and they're writing that off with something else. So we want to get a really good snapshot. And so I would encourage you to reach out to a university to see if they'd be interested in supporting your study.
Thanks, guys, for triple teaming that. That's great. There were a couple of other comments too that I feel like people were trying to do towards that question. I see the USDA Economic Impact of Food Systems Toolkit at USDA AMS is the best resource I know of. And usually the state extension has the metrics and formulas to compute the economic impact of local food. So thank you to both of those who gave up those nuggets of knowledge. While we're waiting for other questions, I just wanted to give a quick moment to Jeff Farbman over at the Wallace Center, who they're actually doing value chain webinars too, which Jim, I know, has been a part of. So Jeff, if you want to talk for just a moment, I just unmuted you. So feel free to, yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. So this summer and fall, we have a value chain coordination learning series. If you harken back to the roles of the value chain coordinator slide that Jim Barham took us through, each webinar focuses on one of those crucial roles for value chain coordination effectiveness. So our webinars showcase value chain coordinators where each role has been used effectively. Each webinar has information on collecting metrics. And I did want to point out that though the primary intended audience of these webinars are those doing or thinking of doing value chain coordination themselves, hearing these examples is sure to inspire brainstorming on how these skills would be advantageous in your area, and also thoughts about who in your area is currently doing this type of thing, or who might take on some of these roles. So we've done one already. We have all signups and recordings are at ngfn.org/webinars. I think, Macy, you can publish that little comment that I had. Yeah. This, just in 2 days on Thursday, is the next one in this series, and it explores the role of convening. So that's all I need to say. I can say more, of course, but please sign up.
All right, thanks, Jeff. And I'll be sure to put that information too in the follow-up email. That way everybody has it. Wallace Center has been a great partner and resource to us as we've been looking at our regional food systems research. So we thank them, and please, if you're interested in this, join their webinar series. It's great. All right, I see a question for anyone who can answer. Has anyone used an equity lens in value chain coordination besides food access?
This is Lindsay. I can, so with our different initiatives, we're really seeking to build that into our local food distribution work. Our last 2 meetings actually were focused on the role of equity in local and regional food distribution, making connections along the value chain, and we had an outside speaker come in from New York, Dennis Derrick at Corbin Hill Food Project, to talk about really the way that their organization is focused on that as a primary mission in their work to get healthy food to those who need it most, and building economic opportunity to do that in an equitable manner. He is a tremendous speaker, and Wallace actually released a video with Dennis and their deputy director, Erica Christensen, recently that I would highly recommend. We then followed that up with a visit to a local nonprofit that actually originated matching dollars in our region and had a great national influence on those programs. They are in a very, very diverse community in our region, and we're finding that their market vendors were needing a space to be able to scale up their product beyond the market. And the commercial kitchens that existed in the region at the time really weren't able to serve them. So I would say yes. Do we have it figured out? I don't think so, but we are trying to be very intentional.
Yeah, and this is Jim. I was just going to add to that. I think in the work with FoodLink and the 13 value chain coordinators, every single one of those coordinators has a different lens or multifaceted lens by which they're looking at social equity within the food system. Some might be more focused on farm viability, because that is an equity issue in terms of our farmers being able to make a reasonable living off of the great work that they do. But then you can go upstream and look at the farm workers and the paid laborers that a lot of our small diversified farms are hiring, and to the extent that there's fair wages there, and then going downstream from farm to all the food chain workers. The largest representation of folks within the food industry, and the tremendous inequities that exist there in the value chain coordinators. Many of them are very cognizant of that as well, whether you're talking about workers in the processing plants to the aggregators, distributors, to those working in restaurants and so forth. And then of course it continues on to the food access issues. And so I don't think it'd be genuine to say that every value chain coordinator is working on every aspect of social equity within the food systems, but they're cognizant of it, and they're trying to find ways to approach it in a way that's going to find mutual benefits for everyone within the value chain.
Great, thanks. And I see that Barbara Stone has her hand up, so I just unmuted her. If you would like to ask your question. Barbara, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So my question is, we're in Iowa, and I know this question may not be 100% relevant to what we're presenting today on this webinar, but I really have appreciated what has been presented. Any ideas? We have, significant CAFO animal confinement in the area of hog raising in Iowa. And we have a large-scale producer that has pulled together about 80 farmers, but he doesn't have the capital locally to really fund getting this to scale. And he even has the market ready and waiting for delivery of the product. So anybody you could connect me to that might be able to help with this, or any ideas from any of you?
Well, give me a little bit more background. What kind of operation is this, and what are they trying to? When you say they're getting to scale, for what are we talking about? This
well, I'm not exactly sure, because this is secondhand. It's coming to me from a farmer that I haven't had enough time yet to really sit down and find out what amount of money he's needing and exactly what part of the infrastructure it is that he's trying to fund. But I'm guessing that it might be partially, processing, if not entirely processing facility, where some 100 farmers that are growing hogs could actually bring them to be processed and then get them into the market.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. The best thing to do is probably just you can connect with me directly or connect me with them, and we can figure out what resources USDA might have, because there's some I can think of several offhand, but it'd be better just to have the conversation offline.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, James.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
A couple more questions. Can Katrina expand on what her COGS responsibilities and deliverables were for the first grant she was involved in, the USDA Farmers Market Promotion?
Yeah, that was 10 years ago. So the deliverables were to, at the time, most markets didn't have any form of accepting SNAP, so we bought SNAP and worked with the Department of Agriculture to work with them on how SNAP works in farmers markets. We did a regional marketing campaign that putting together posters and looking at how we can promote SNAP use, but also in general, working with getting more people to the farmers markets. It was also just connecting people. A farmer's market in one region looks very different than the other, so sharing stories, sharing successes. But the main outcomes were to get people together, to provide the SNAP machines, to develop marketing materials, and then I think it was pretty simple. It's really hard for me to remember, but that I think was the gist of it. But if you want more information, you can email me and I can send you what we came up with as an outcome of that grant.
Since we are pretty much at 4 o'clock, I'm just going to ask one more question, then we'll wrap up. Here is Elliot from Austin, Texas. Hello, I'm also a Texan. What have been successful tricks in getting producers, especially in rural areas, to the table to discuss value chain coordination? And has anyone had success giving incentives like payments to producers to participate in this sort of work?
This is Katrina. I can talk to that a little bit. Most of our farmers in our region, which were small, are really eager to talk about their markets and their difficulties. Generally, what we find is that if you provide a venue for farmers to talk to each other, that they tend to come because they like that opportunity. If that isn't easy for you to convince them that they could talk to each other, I just would say just talk about the benefits that could come out of it. They could increase their sales, they could get to know different markets, just really addressing what barriers you're trying to overcome and making that kind of a sexy, how you frame it. And then incentives, we have paid for gas, because some people it costs a lot. Maybe they have to drive over 100 miles round trip. We always provide food as an incentive. I know everybody likes to eat and they feel it becomes a more informal conversation and less formal, like you're the COG and they're the farmers, but really just explain what benefit they get from it.
All right.
Macy, I would just add really quickly, this is Lindsay. We have a lot of different farm organizations and networks in our region, and we tend to work with folks that work with farmers. We do have convenings where farmers are welcome. We are in touch with them directly, but we really try to take advantage of some of the local conferences where we know that farmers will already be in the off season. Yeah, I just say that as a bit of a contrast to Katrina, and happy to talk further about this or any other topic.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much to the audience out there for all your questions and comments. Feel free to reach out to any of us. You should see our emails on the screen for more questions as you think of them, or comments or feedback, or if you like this webinar series, let me know if there's any other comments that you're interested, any other topics you're interested in as in relation to regional councils. We're glad to look at it for future webinars. Thanks again to our great speakers for sharing their knowledge and their stories with us, and they've been great resources for me and their experience, and definitely feel free to reach out to them. They are all super kind and super helpful. Don't forget to download the webinar slides from our handouts, but you should get email tomorrow following up with a recording of this webinar. So feel free to share that. Don't forget to join Wallace Center's webinar series that's been going on, and that will go on the next few months. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.